Welcome to a new tutorial on Yahaha Studio. Today I'll show you how to create a new boss, this time tailored towards melee players. So if you're making a game with swords and melee weapons, this will be a good boss to add. As you will see in just a second, this boss has two main attacks from range. A triple beam that comes out of the floor, and if you stay in the area it will damage you. And there's the frost attack that makes the player CC. Basically, you can't move or jump for 2 seconds, so this makes you vulnerable to the triple beam attack. Also, this boss can teleport away from the players when they get close, so if you get close to damage him, you'll see this aura on the floor, and then he will TP at one location in the arena. You'll see in just a second that if you stay near the boss when he is TPing, he will be repelled and also damaged. So those are the challenges that this boss poses to the players. Now we'll see the objects that are in the scene to make this happen. The first one is of course our model. Then we have a fog effect just to make a little bit of ambience around him. Then we have the TP trigger box. This is the area that will trigger the TP for the boss. So when you enter this area, you will see that little aura on the floor, and a few seconds later the boss will TP away. And the TP aura is just the location where the object that is right out here, the location that the object will spawn. Then to the side we have this glow zone red object right here. That is the object that holds the AoE node graph. It's also an spawnable object, so it's called AoE as well. And this one also holds a specific node graph that I'll show a bit later. This is the beam up that has the orb node graph. This orb node graph, as we saw on the last video, is just damage the player when he is inside the trigger box. And of course this is also a spawnable object. As you can see, I named it beam right here. We have the vortex portal that works as the aura that I showed earlier to show the players that they are in danger, so they have to move away from the enemy eventually. And then the beam up is the effect for the TP on the boss, and this also has the orb node graph. This also, if it hits the player, will repel them with the react component right here and damage them with the orb node graph. We also have 4 TPs. These are empty objects. As you can see, TP1, TP2, TP3 and TP4. These are the possible locations for this boss to TP out, and I'll show you how it's done on the node graphs soon. Then we have the ice floor trail, that is the effect of the freeze. This one is a spawnable object as well, but has no node graphs. All of the behaviors, all of the components are inside the other node graph that I'll show first. Then the ice formation, that's just to show the player that he is stunned, that he is rooted. And we have the ice explosion, which is just a cool visual effect. So we come back here and we'll see there is a boss trigger empty object on the arena. This is the object that holds the wizard skills node graph, that is the biggest node graph we have. I will show it to you right now. So the first thing we'll do on this node graph is spawn the AoE, which is this object I showed you earlier, right here. So if we get to spawn this object, we are on the right path. So we have the on trigger enter behavior, just like we had last time, is player character, and then we set a variable to 1. This means that the player entered the arena. Now the game knows that you are in the arena and the enemy can start getting the skills out. Otherwise, if you were away from the arena in any other part of the map, the boss will still throw skills at you, and that's not something that we want. So while this variable is at 1, we have a delay. This delay is basically how much time the boss takes between the casts of the triple beam. And then this is the triple beam spawn. So it gets the location of the player, spawns AoE, as I showed you before. AoE is this object right here. You can see the spawnable object marker right here. It spawns one, delays, gets the position again, spawns another one, delays, and spawns a third one. That's why you see a triple beam right there. If you do this node graph, you should see this object spawning on the ground, but nothing yet happens. There is another node graph that I'll switch. It's the AoE node graph. Real quick, then we'll go back to the wizard skills because it's directly tied to these objects, right? The AoE object, as I showed you, has the AoE node graph as well. So this is the one I'm showing you right now. It also has the same trigger enter, is player character, and then integer branches. So if the integer is 0, this all will happen. Why do we use this? Because we don't want it to happen multiple times. So if you're getting the same trigger area multiple times, you don't want to have multiple beams. It's basically just one beam per object. After the beam goes up, this object is destroyed. So let's go through. On trigger enter, as I showed you, then a delay, a very small delay, 0.2 seconds. Then this variable is set to 1. So this will not be triggered again by the same object. This is why we are doing this variable. Another small delay, and you get the global position of self, which is this object that just spawned, and you spawn the beam, which is the object to the side that damages the player, this one right here. After spawning the beam, if the player is inside, he will get damaged by the orb node graph, and after a small delay, you destroy both of them. You destroy the beam and you destroy self. So after just a second and a couple of milliseconds, this damages you or not and is gone. It's deleted from the scene. So if you use this node graph and this one, then the triple beam should be working. You should see it coming out of the floor and it should damage the player if they are inside that area. Now we will move to the part of the ice trail, which is this one right down here. So if you on trigger, always we start with the trigger enter. It's very easy to start like that. And if you trigger enter is a player, we have another variable right here, which is the same as we use here. So if the player triggered this one already, the freeze will start, right? So it's almost like we are doing it on the same node graph right here. And after 9 seconds of delay, so the time between the casts of the freeze attack is 9. Of course, you can adapt it on your game and you can make it the way you prefer, but I'm using 9 seconds right here. You get the position of the wizard and you spawn the ice trail on the wizard and you register an event for later, but when you spawn, use event trigger and then you get the position of the player that entered the trigger and start a movement towards that player. After 4 seconds, it's the delay I put here, you destroy the ice trail. So this is just how it works. It spawns the ice trail object if that variable on range is 1 and then moves the ice trail towards the player. This is just what happens and then later it gets destroyed. If you do this first node graph up here, oh just a second, yeah. If you do this one up here, it will spawn the ice trail, it will move towards the player and it will destroy itself, but it will not freeze the players yet. That's why we have the event register right here, and that's why we have this part down here. So you register the event so you can get the same entity right here, and you do another trigger enter, you get the same entity that was spawned right here, and you see, is it a player character? If so, then it sets the max walk speed for the player as 0. Also the jump to 0, and then you spawn the ice cube on the position of the player just to make that visual effect that I was talking about earlier. After that, after 2 seconds of delay, it's the time that the player will be rooted, you set the speed again to the standard value, which was 6, you set the jump to the standard value, which was 2, and you destroy the ice cube. That's how it works. You don't destroy the ice trail here because it was it was already destroyed right up here. So you just have to destroy the ice cube, and then if you do both of this, the ice trail will be working perfectly. It will be hitting the player and it will be rooting them on place. Now the last thing that we'll have to do is the TP for the boss. So as you remember, when you get in that area, you can see here the TP trigger area. I'll show it again so you don't get lost. It's the TP trigger, it's this trigger box right here. If it's a player character, then you get the global position of the TP aura that I told you that is just to mark the position that the object will spawn. Then you have another integer right here. If the TP trigger is at 0, it will spawn. And then after spawning, you set the TP trigger to 1, so you don't get double. So if you get in the area and then you spawn one of these, then you get out and in again before the TP. If you don't have this variable set up, it will keep spawning until you stop getting in, and that won't make it work. So you won't be able to destroy the one, it will still be in the arena. That's why we use these variables right here. After spawning, we have the delay of 3 seconds. This is the time it takes for the boss to TP. Then you get the position of this object that we spawn, and we spawn the TP beam, which is that one object that I showed you that also damages the player. This one right here. This has the orb node graph, just so you don't forget, to damage the player if the player enters the trigger area. So after it's spawned, then this is a part that's a bit more complicated, but not too much. We have a random variable right here. After it's spawned, you set the TP, which is another variable right here, another integer, and you use the random integer in range node. So you put the minimum on 1 and for max. So you can have a random every time this node right here gets triggered. You can have a random number for from 1 to 4, and then you set the TP trigger right here to 0, so it can happen again because it will be teleported. Now you allow this node to happen again when the boss moves to another location. Then we delay 0.5 seconds and destroy this TP beam object that we made, and we destroyed the TP AoE object that we made as well. Now the boss actually gets TP. So we do a branch right here, and we have 4 conditions. This part right here is just to check which of the values was chosen on the random integer in range. So you use a branch right here. If it's 1, then it will TP to the TP1 location, if it's true. If it's false, then we have another branch right here and check if it's the 2. If it's true, if it was 2, then it teleports the boss to the TP2 location. Check again. If it was false, you check for 3, same thing, and you check for 4, the same thing. And here we have the cursed wizard, that is the object that is getting TP'd to those locations. So this is basically how you set the TP up. It's a bit complicated, but if you understand the logic, it's pretty easy to do. And this is basically all that you need to have these node graphs and this boss working. So if you have any questions, you can talk to me in the comments or on Discord.